The wind cut hard across the ridge, dry and sharp like it carried bits of glass. Dust lifted off the rock face in small spirals before settling again. The outpost sat quiet except for the low hum of radios and the sound of laughter breaking through the chill. A group of Army Rangers leaned against the sandbags, rifles slung loose across their chests, watching the Navy chief set up her rifle. The laughter carried a tone sharper than the wind. One of them called out, his voice half teasing, half testing. "What's a Navy woman doing with a real sniper rifle playing dress-up for Instagram?" The others laughed, the kind of laugh soldiers use when they think the point has already been made. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter didn't look up. She adjusted the bipod of her McMillan TAC-50, checked the bolt, then brushed a thin layer of sand off the receiver. Her movements were slow, deliberate, practiced. The rifle's weight settled naturally against her shoulder. She had done this more times than she could count. She felt the wind, counted the rhythm of it without thinking. 8 years of training made the sound of it feel almost familiar. She could hear them still, voices fading in and out between gusts. She didn't care enough to listen. The steel of the rifle was cold through her gloves. Her eyes stayed on the valley below, tracing the invisible lines of wind between the peaks. To the Rangers. She looked calm. To her. This was the start of another long watch. The air smelled of cordite and dust, the kind of mix that said a firefight had happened somewhere too close. 3 hours from now, those same men would stop laughing. 3 hours from now, the impossible would no longer be impossible. Emily Carter was born in Montana, in a valley where the winters came early and the wind never seemed to stop. Her mother had once been a biathlon competitor, the kind who chased Olympic dreams on skis through cold silence. She didn't win a medal, but she carried lessons harder than gold. She taught Emily to breathe between heartbeats, to find stillness even when her pulse raced, to know that control came not from force but from patience. Those mornings on the frozen range stayed with Emily. The crack of the .22 rifle echoed across snowfields as her mother's voice drifted behind it, steady and calm, telling her to let the world get quiet before taking the shot. Emily learned early that precision wasn't about talent. It was about discipline. At 19, she left Montana for the Navy, choosing a path that surprised everyone but her mother. She joined as a hospital corpsman, trained to treat the wounded and stay composed when chaos broke loose. Long nights in the trauma bays taught her what it meant to stay calm while others panicked. But it was her near-perfect range scores that caught attention. When she qualified expert on every weapon the Navy handed her, a recruiter from Naval Special Warfare took notice. Months later, she entered a classified selection program meant for a few exceptional operators, hand-picked for reconnaissance and overwatch roles that didn't officially exist. She never talked about it. Her records were buried under layers of clearance codes, and her achievements didn't make the news. That was fine with her. She didn't need applause. She needed her data to be right, her breathing steady, her hands sure. In Syria, she once took a shot that measured 2,470 meters. The file was redacted before it ever reached official reports. But she remembered it. The dry air, the sun on her cheek, the quiet before impact. It wasn't the distance she remembered most. It was the stillness. The same stillness her mother taught her in the Montana snow. The space between heartbeats where everything else disappeared, and all that mattered was the shot. Kunar Province was nothing but rock, wind, and distance. In 2015, it still felt like the edge of the world. A place where mountains swallowed radio signals and men disappeared into ridgelines. The observation post the Rangers called Raven sat carved into a slope at 8,000 feet. It overlooked a valley that ran east toward the border of Pakistan, jagged terrain that caught sunlight like shattered glass. From up there, everything looked small, even the danger. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter had been attached to the Joint Task Force for less than a week. Her assignment was simple on paper: provide overwatch support for the 75th Ranger Regiment during a hostage recovery operation. The target was an American contractor named David Morrison. Intelligence from a Predator feed and intercepted comms put him inside a Taliban compound roughly 3,200 meters from their position. The mission plan called for a night assault using 2 Ranger platoons inserted by helicopter under blackout conditions. The objective was to breach, recover, and extract. Carter listened quietly as the team laid out routes, call signs, and contingency triggers. The air inside the tent smelled like diesel, sweat, and dust. When the map came around, she traced the grid lines, calculated the angle of fire, and noted the elevation difference between the observation post and the compound. She realized it might be possible. Not easy, not probable, but possible. She mentioned it once, evenly, while pointing to the map. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brenner, the Ranger sniper team leader, shook his head before she finished. 3,200 meters is outside engagement doctrine, he said. Not dismissive, but certain. The Coriolis effect alone will kill the shot. Wind shear across that valley changes every 100 feet. You'd be chasing ghosts. Carter didn't argue. She just nodded, folded the map back, and noted wind patterns from the morning's weather readout. Brenner had been there 3 years. He knew the ground better than anyone. She respected that, but respect didn't change math. Outside, the sky was pale and empty, the kind of light that meant heat was coming soon. She stepped out, adjusted her cap against the wind, and looked across the valley again. It stretched forever. 1,000 invisible forces between her and the man they were trying to bring home. If the air stayed still, if the weather held, and if the world allowed it, maybe the impossible could line up just once. The light shifted across the ridge as the afternoon deepened. The wind changed direction 3 times in less than an hour. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter stayed behind her rifle, patient, calm, and still. The McMillan TAC-50 rested on its bipod, the long barrel extending past the sandbag wall, its surface coated in fine dust that caught the sun. She opened her dope book, the pages stained with oil and fingerprints, and began entering data in tight, deliberate handwriting. Each number mattered. Range 3,200 meters. Elevation 8,000 feet. Temperature 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 22.4 inches of mercury. Wind 8 miles per hour, gusting to 15. Density altitude slightly higher than calculated. She adjusted her math, scribbling small notes in the margin. Next to her, Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Reyes read wind data from his Kestrel 5700 Elite. He called out the readings quietly, his tone as steady as hers. She logged the variations, cross-checking her ballistic app with her range card. The numbers came alive in her head, a pattern of physics and instinct. She adjusted for spindrift and Coriolis, small corrections that meant everything at this distance. Her hold would be around 5.4 mils elevation, 2.1 mils left for wind. At that range, a fraction of a degree meant a miss by yards. She recalculated again, just to be certain. Behind her, Staff Sergeant Kyle Brenner leaned on his scope stand, arms crossed. He watched her for a while, the edge of a smirk playing at his mouth. "Navy shooters sure love their gadgets," he said lightly. "Out here, we trust our gut more than our screens." Carter didn't respond. She ran one final check on her ballistic computer, then reached for the rifle bolt. Her gloved fingers moved with quiet precision, cycling it smoothly before settling the rifle back into position. The smell of metal and oil hung thick in the air. Her breathing was slow, measured, the kind that came from years of practice and muscle memory. The valley below shimmered with heat. Somewhere far away, a burst of gunfire echoed against the mountains. Faint, but distinct. The radio hissed with static, carrying pieces of other teams' chatter. She ignored it all, her focus narrowing to the numbers in front of her and the rhythm of her pulse. Reyes leaned closer, his voice low. Wind just shifted, 10 to 12 through mid-range. She adjusted 0.5 mil and logged it without hesitation. The pen scratched against the paper, the sound small but grounding. This was her language. Not arrogance, not talk. Just math and air density and patience. The Rangers could keep their jokes. The wind could change again. She would be ready when it mattered. The quiet around her wasn't emptiness. It was control. The sun slid lower behind the mountains, turning the valley into a mix of gold and shadow. The air cooled fast, and the wind started to bite. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter stayed prone, behind her scope, watching the compound below as light faded from the ridgeline. Beside her, Petty Officer Second Class. Daniel Reyes adjusted his spotting scope, calling quiet updates about temperature and wind. The overwatch position felt smaller as dusk fell, the world reduced to the faint hum of the radio and the scrape of wind against stone. Down in the valley, movement shifted inside the compound. The hostage, David Morrison, had been moved from one building to another. Guards rotated more frequently, and their pacing felt tighter. Carter noted every change, marking times and locations in her notebook. The Rangers below were still prepping for the night assault, their plan fixed. Brenner had confirmed that the team would launch at 2000 hours, a clean infiltration under darkness. Carter checked her watch. It was 1800. 2 hours to go. Then Reyes stiffened. He refocused his optic. "They're setting up a camera," he said quietly. Carter looked through her scope. A man carried a tripod. Another dragged Morrison into the courtyard, forcing him to his knees. Her pulse slowed as she switched to higher magnification. A figure with a knife stood beside the captive, gesturing to the camera operator. The intent was unmistakable. She reached for her radio. "Ranger 6. This is Overwatch 1. Visual confirmation of hostile execution prep." Brenner's voice crackled back through static. "Overwatch. Hold position. Assault team is 30 mics out. Maintain visual. Do not engage." Carter hesitated. Morrison's head was down, his shoulders shaking. 2 men stood behind him, one shouting in Pashto. She could almost feel the countdown starting. She keyed her mic again. "Ranger 6. They're preparing to execute. He doesn't have 30 minutes. Negative. Overwatch. Do not compromise the mission." The radio went quiet. The wind pushed a small cloud of dust over her rifle. She exhaled slowly, steadying her breathing. Her hand found the safety lever, resting on it for a long second. Reyes didn't speak. He didn't have to. In the valley, the camera operator adjusted his frame. The man with the knife raised his hand. Carter could hear her heartbeat through the fabric of her helmet. The decision pressed on her like weight. She moved her thumb, flipping the selector from safe to fire. The world fell completely silent. Carter's voice came through the radio, low and steady. Overwatch 1 engaging under authorized rules of engagement. Imminent execution of American hostage confirmed. She didn't wait for approval. Her mind was already committed, her focus narrowing to a tunnel of numbers and physics. Reyes called the last wind readout, 8 miles per hour at position, gusting to 15 through mid-range, pushing right to left. Carter locked it in. The Kestrel 5700 Elite flickered in her gloved hand, its screen glowing pale green against the fading light. She verified her range again with the Vectronics PLRF-10C laser rangefinder. Range confirmed at 3,182 meters. Data fed cleanly into her applied ballistics elite solver. The solution appeared. a string of values that only she truly understood. She dialed her scope, the Horus H-59 reticle clear in her eye. Elevation 5.4 mils. Windage 2.1 mils left. Coriolis effect, spin drift, temperature, and elevation all accounted for. The rifle was tuned for this. The .50 caliber McMillan TAC-50 loaded with a hand-built 750 grain AMAX round, capable of leaving the barrel at 2,820 feet per second. It was built for long shots, but this one stretched even its limits. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse settled at 42 beats per minute, the way her mother taught her years ago in the Montana snow. She exhaled halfway, letting her lungs pause at perfect balance. Her finger found the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure. Clean break. The rifle roared across the ridge. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, firm but expected. Dust and gravel erupted in a wide arc as the muzzle brake redirected the blast backward. Reyes flinched, then immediately refocused on his spotting scope. The valley echoed once and went silent again. In the air, the bullet spun at nearly 300,000 rotations per minute. It climbed through thin mountain atmosphere, arcing higher, fighting gravity with pure velocity. The wind tugged at it, invisible hands shifting its path inch by inch. The Coriolis effect bent it slightly left, the spin drift pushing back right. The air temperature and density worked against it, slowing it fraction by fraction. For 3.7 seconds, that bullet lived between math and miracle. Down in the compound, the executioner lifted his arm. The camera operator leaned forward, adjusting focus. Morrison knelt motionless, his head bowed. At 3.7 seconds, the bullet arrived. It struck the executioner high in the chest, the impact violent and instant. He fell backward before he even understood what happened. The knife clattered to the ground beside Morrison. Harmless. The camera operator froze for a second, then dropped his device and ran. Chaos erupted as guards scrambled for cover, shouting in confusion, firing in random directions at shadows that weren't there. Carter didn't move. Her eyes stayed behind the scope, tracking for confirmation. Target down. Hostage alive. She reported quietly into the radio. The channel stayed silent for a moment. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Reyes looked at her, his mouth half open but without words. The valley below glowed in fading orange light, empty and still. Carter logged the shot in her dope book, precise as always, range, wind, time, conditions. Then she looked back through her scope one last time. The world felt weightless, soundless, suspended in that strange peace that sometimes followed violence. She let out the rest of her breath. The silence that settled afterward carried more power than the rifle's sound had ever held. The shot echoed once and then disappeared into the valley. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Just the faint whistle of wind moving past the radio antennas and the dull hum of static. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter stayed behind her scope, her heartbeat steady, her breathing slow. She tracked the target through magnification, watching as the executioner fell backward, his weapon slipping from his hand. The hostage, David Morrison, stayed still for a moment, then began to move. Even with his hands bound, he rolled toward the nearest wall, finding what little cover he could. That small act told her he was still thinking, still alive. Beside her, Petty Officer Second Class. Daniel Reyes exhaled, the breath trembling slightly as it left him. He watched through his spotting scope, then spoke quietly, almost to himself. Impact confirmed. The radio broke the silence. Ranger 6 to Overwatch 1. Confirm range. Carter's reply was calm, clipped, and exact. Confirmed impact at 3,182 meters. Target neutralized. Hostage alive. No one spoke after that. The valley remained still. The Taliban fighters, confused and panicked, fled into the hills, unaware of what had hit them. The assault team launched 28 minutes later, moving through the compound without firing a single shot. They found Morrison shaken, but alive. The enemy scattered, the camera equipment abandoned. The next morning, inside the debrief tent, the air felt different. No celebration, no noise, just quiet professionalism. Staff Sergeant Kyle Brenner stood before the Joint Task Force officers, his tone formal but low. "I've seen great shots before," he said, but this wasn't just a shot. This was applied physics under pressure. Calm when the rest of us were waiting. I was wrong to dismiss her. That's not a mistake I'll make again. No one applauded. They didn't need to. In their line of work, respect wasn't loud. It lived in the way people looked at each other afterward. The small nods, the shared understanding of what it meant to carry that kind of responsibility. Outside, the mountains were quiet again, the same cold wind moving through the valley. Somewhere below, the echoes of that one perfect shot still lingered, fading into the distance like a promise kept. Months passed before anything about that day came back to her in a way that felt real. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter had returned to Coronado, back inside the rhythm of Naval Special Warfare Command. The Pacific air carried salt through open hangar doors, and the days fell into their familiar pattern of range work, maintenance, and quiet preparation. Life went on, as it always did between deployments. One afternoon, she found an envelope sitting on her desk. It was standard issue, plain white, marked only with the official routing stamp of the internal mail system. No name on the return line, no insignia, just a weight that felt different the moment she picked it up. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting uneven and deliberate. "Chief Carter, you gave me back to my daughters. There are no words enough." It was signed simply, David Morrison. She read it once, then again, her eyes tracing each uneven letter. The paper was slightly wrinkled, maybe from travel, maybe from the hands that had written it. She could still smell the faint trace of gun oil on her fingers, a scent that never fully left. Outside, through the thin glass of her office window, she could hear the low hum of the ocean rolling against the pier. She folded the letter neatly and slipped it between the pages of her dope book, right beside the line that marked the 3,182-meter shot. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just sat for a while, feeling the quiet settle in around her. Some things didn't need to be known, or recorded, or told. Some things were enough just to have happened. Once, in silence, when it mattered most. The desert was quiet, except for the distant hum of the wind. Early morning light stretched across the range, soft and golden, catching on the edges of metal and sand. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter stood alone at her firing position. The McMillan TAC-50 laid out on the mat in front of her. The same rifle, the same marks, the same discipline. She moved through her routine without rush or thought, each motion practiced 1,000 times before. Chamber check, bolt inspection, optic alignment, trigger test. The metallic clicks sounded clean and sharp in the still air. She didn't think about the shot in numbers anymore. Not the range, not the physics, not even the record it might have set. That wasn't what mattered. The mission had become something simpler in her memory, a moment where calculation met courage, where silence met decision. Being a sniper wasn't about distance or glory. It was about preparation, timing, and the will to act when hesitation would cost a life. She understood, now, that the bullet didn't care who fired it. It didn't care about gender, pride, or rivalry between branches. It only cared about physics, stability, and the hands that sent it forward. What mattered was the work done before the shot. The hours of study, the stillness, the breath that held steady when it counted. Most people would never hear about her mission in Kunar. The reports were sealed, the footage classified. That was fine. The story wasn't hers to tell anyway. It belonged to the math, the moment, and the man who lived because she didn't look away. She settled behind her scope once more. Through the glass, the horizon shimmered in heat and light. She drew a breath, slow and even, and exhaled halfway. The crosshairs steadied, ready again, just as before. Sometimes proving yourself doesn't mean being louder, faster, or tougher. It means standing steady when everyone else doubts you. Chief Petty Officer Emily Carter didn't argue, didn't boast, and didn't ask for recognition. She just did her job, with the kind of focus that comes from knowing what's right and what's necessary. Her story isn't just about one impossible shot. It's about patience, preparation, and quiet courage under pressure. For anyone who's ever had to prove themselves twice, once to others and once to themselves, her story is a reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's the calm voice that says, "I have got this," when no one else believes you can. If her story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories of quiet strength and true professionalism, subscribe and stay with us.